I am excited to be hosting the first talk today. In just a moment, I'm going to be joined by Liam Casey, who is the founder and CEO of PCH. For more than 2 decades, PCH has worked with some of the world's best brands and innovative startups to create and deliver breakthrough products and consumer experiences. We will dive deep into everything that PCH ultimately delivers to its consumers or customers. Liam is a thought leader in the hardware, supply chain, and sustainability, go-to-market, and startup initiatives. He's disrupted traditional product development and supply chain models, and has been driving innovative solutions and success to many global brands. I can go on in a number of the accolades that Liam has garnered over the course of his career, but I will allow him to kind of share a bit more about PCH and what it offers to its customers. If we can welcome him to the stage right now.
Good afternoon. Hello,
hey,
Scott.
Liam, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know I gave a little bit of a background on your bio, but I wanted to let you, as the expert in your business, provide a bit more background on what it is that PCH does and offers to your clients.
Great. Well, thank you, Scott. Yeah, we work with clients from all over the world that have ideas and concepts for products, and they want to bring it to market. They need a robust supply chain to bring it from concept all the way through to the consumer. And that is, like in the hardware world, is engineering. It's we don't do the industrial design. We partner with industrial designers, and then we do the product design, product development, engineering. We bring it into get it ready for NPI, new product introduction, mass production, into the facilities that produce the product. And then we actually manage the out-of-box experience, so the packaging part of the business, where we actually pack the product. And then we manage the last mile delivery, DTC. And it's that end-to-end is what's important. And more recently, we've been doing more around the what happens post the sale, when the customer gets the product, when they go through that out-of-box experience. What is that experience like? We work with some of our brands to help them understand feedback from customers, or what do they need to change. Like we run surveys with customers live, so that we can get interaction from the consumer about the product. And that end-to-end stack is what we focus on.
That's amazing, and I like the fact that you added in that sort of component there of that sort of post-purchase component, which is so often kind of forgotten in it's the rush to get things to the consumer, but there's really so much that can happen after that fact as well.
Yeah, and it is really where the experience for the consumer starts. It is that experience, moment of truth, and you really have to be close to the consumer when that happens, because that's the make or break. If it's a great experience, they'll come back. And that's where brands start to build that relationship and that bond with the consumer, which is what's all important.
So I know we'll get more into sort of PCH's offering as we go through the conversation today, but much of what we're going to be focusing on as the sort of for our conversation or discussion today is going to be around a piece of research that we partnered on, which I know we're going to make available to everybody that's tuning in here, which is all on the art of the drop. And I wonder, I think people have a lot of assumptions about what a product drop is, and you obviously bring a unique perspective to defining that model. So just as context for the rest of our conversation, if you could take a moment and just describe what we mean by a product drop.
Yeah, let's look at across 3 different areas. If you look at like the way the fashion industry is doing it, the way the tech industry in general are doing it, and then the way the startups are doing it. I think if you look at, say, the fashion industry, you look at companies like Supreme, the way they'll do a drop, it gets massive attention around the world. It gets like when they're doing a global drop, everyone queues up either virtually or physically, and they actually get the product, and it's almost like winning the product. if you look at the tech world in general, if you look at China, this is where you see a lot of it. You look at where, this is how Xiaomi started years ago, probably about 10 years, 11 years ago now, I don't know, but 9 years ago, I think, where they actually would launch a batch of products. So they would make 100,000 phones or 500,000 phones. And then they would actually, when the phones were coming off the production lines, they would actually then release it to consumers to go online. And I think the fact that China was such a big online presence meant that that's where consumers went to get the product. You also see companies like OnePlus doing the same thing. They're again Chinese company, but global reach, and they actually do the very same. They'll do a launch, and usually the product sells out on launch, and that creates what's in the industry is known as hunger marketing. Well, they'll oversell what they have capacity, and then there's a backlog, and people will wait for it, and it gives them the chance to go and produce more. We like it because it's, from a sustainability point of view, you're actually reducing the amount of excess that's in the market. And then you look at the way startups do it, which is crowdfunding, which we don't like, but it happens. And it was a great tool when it started. You have great companies like Kickstarter, Indiegogo. They have these fantastic tools that actually allow you to go out online and create that, excitement about a product. And allowed people, it got a lot of interest and got people purchase, people put deposits on. But the problem was the experience might not come for a year. In some cases, it didn't come at all. So that did damage to the whole concept of like what we call a drop for startups. And I think it dented confidence in the investor market of investing in, just because you've been successful in getting interest in a product from a video. That doesn't mean you can deliver and execute. And that's where we help companies. If you look at the Chinese model of the companies like Xiaomi, or say somebody like OnePlus, they know they can execute. They won't go out and pre-sell the product until they know it's ready to ship, that generates huge interest.
Yeah, so that's an interesting distinction there, is that sort of difference between what you're saying is like crowdfunding traditionally has kind of been this like pre-sell market, whereas the drop is much more intentional in terms of, we know we can produce all X number of units, and the goal is to sell those out. You talked about how sort of the timing aspect of drops is such a sort of critical component in sort of going through that process of executing. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about those, about how you think about that sort of the drop model and those sort of stages and sort of bringing a product from that sort of initial phase into the market.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us, I think the way we think about it is that crowdfunding is a marketing tool. It is not a financing tool. And that's the big difference. Whereas the companies like Xiaomi, they saw it as a great way to market and to get excitement and buzz around the product. Whereas the companies in the Western world saw it as a great way to raise money. But if they underestimated the money, then when the money's out, they can't finish and they can't deliver on the drop. And that's what creates that 1 year gap in the middle, which is the disaster. So crowdfunding is a marketing tool, not a finance tool. You've got to fund your product, the development of the product, independently of that. And that's why some companies now, if you look at some of the more established companies that have started to use crowdfunding recently, they're actually generating a lot of interest, and they can, if they use it as a benchmark to see what kind of interest is in the product, and that's when they actually turn on the fuel to produce the product, which is good, makes sense. But if you look at it, I mean, for us, in a product, you've got to have like the concept for a product, and then you actually get into the industrial design, the product design, and then you've got to get it ready for mass production. And that's the stage where we think you can actually start to generate interest. And it's great if you generate interest, like if you're a month or 6 weeks away from the product being ready to ship, then you can actually then you can actually go and crowdfund and generate the interest, because the interest will, you'll get media coverage, you'll get the blogs will be talking about your product, which is what you want, right? That's all part of the interest. And then the purchase happens, where people can actually buy the product. And then the experience, you want to create the experience very close to the purchase, like within days if possible, so that when people actually purchase or pay hand over the money, that they're going to get the product within days, maximum maybe a week, 10 days, because that's where you create that link between the purchase and the experience is really important. And then the experience starts when they get it, that out-of-box experience. That's when you build that relationship with the consumer.
And you talked about this, and you just sort of hinted at it now, where there's this sort of like interesting moment where in between, as you're sort of in that sort of generating interest phase, almost having that gap is an advantage or an opportunity, because that creates some sort of space for a business to kind of like look at the marketplace and the interest, and then use that as a moment to kind of refine the experience. Can you dive into that a little bit more there as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at some of the companies, they'll have a pattern for when they'll launch a phone or launch a device, and like you'll see that some like the bigger companies that are experienced in the space, they'll make their announcement, let's say early in the month, and then they'll say it'll ship within 3 weeks or 4 weeks. In between that 3 weeks, they give the product, the device, they give it to bloggers, to tech reviewers, who actually go and test it, and they write about it, and that generates more interest and more hype about the product, so that when you do launch it for purchase, that there is a demand there for it. And again, the other thing as well is we're seeing a lot more focus on planning and getting the product to know what success looks like. It's amazing. We've sat with so many entrepreneurs over the years that have great ideas for great products, and we ask them, what does success look like in year one? And they'll come out with numbers like 10 million or whatever. Like, and you say, hang on a second, I think Apple sold 500,000 iPods in the first year. So it's context. Understand what success looks like, and build that into your business plan, which is a big thing, which we say to all of the companies, the startups we work with, especially. But even like with now, we're finding that more the more established brands are also we're focused on. They have a benchmark now for what, like in their space, what does success look like, and that's really important. And then how do we achieve it, and how do we go beyond?
And you also you mentioned this sort of idea that also in that sort of that time, is there, if the sort of infrastructure is in place, sort of operationally, you can also sort of tweak the customer experience during that time as well, and almost use that sort of 6 to 8 weeks to really sort of like go from a fairly finished idea, and then really kind of refine that during that time. Is that what is sort of necessary in order to have that sort of mechanism in place?
The number one thing is that it's a DTC business, so you're going direct to consumer, so you actually have control of the experience. You're not dependent on third-party retailer or something. You are going to control that complete end-to-end experience, which is the most important thing. And if you look today in our world, we always say that we're like 3 hours from all the factories we work with, and we're 3 days from 90% of the consumers anywhere in the world that will buy the products which we touch. So that, for us is really important. We call it a long last mile. If you look at, say, Amazon talks about, I think it's an 8-mile last mile. Now, to put stock into an 8-mile last mile, you've needed a lot of warehouses around the world to do that. Whereas we talk about an 8,000-mile last mile. That has a huge impact, and especially if you're funding the supply chain, one warehouse is much easier to fill than multiple warehouses. And that long last mile, again, you have control of the experience. If you are, planning the moment of interest, the moment of purchase, and the moment of experience, you can decide, if the air freight to get it to the last mile to the consumer takes 10 days, it doesn't matter once you know it's going to get there, because you can schedule when you ship. And it's about managing the consumer's experience as well, which is really important.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, and I mean, it's learning more about that long last mile as you sort of talk about it. It's pretty incredible because it obviously opens up the door for a business to literally be sort of selling globally right out of the gate, essentially. And I also the sort of ability to drop ship directly from that sort of warehouse that's like right near manufacturing also opens up some additional benefits. And I wonder if you can kind of unpack that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think, look, one of the things that what happens with the D2C model is that, and especially now, what we're seeing with a lot of the companies we work with, the once you move to D2C, your business changes and your mindset has to change. You move completely from a forecasting model to a planning model. And what I mean by that is that you depended on a retailer's forecast, or a third-party retailer, or an e-commerce partner forecast if you're in traditional channels. If you're going D2C, you're planning, because you have to do the planning, and you have to make the decisions, and you have to make the calls. And what, like, okay, we're going to sell, 1,000,000 units or 100,000 units, whatever that number is. So you're going to do your planning and your scheduling. You'll say, okay, if it's, we're going to, the product's coming off the production line on the 1st of September. We're going to have it ready for production within 24 hours, 48 hours, or for pack out and for delivery. And then you're going to tell consumers we're going to deliver on the 15th of September. So you actually then take anything up to 10 days to do that delivery, which you can do very well. And again, you will have all the consumers' details, their addresses, all their contact details. You'll have all that. You can manage all that. Put you in much more control, more so than, say, if you're going to like ship it to a retailer and or an e-commerce partner, they're going to put it in a warehouse, and you kind of like, you have no power. You kind of sit back and wait for them to tell you, hey, your product is sold. It's great. Whereas like it's not a good model.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we were talking earlier, I had always sort of, wrongly, I guess, assumed that forecasting and planning were kind of like a synonymous term, but really in the way that you sort of think about it, and that sort of switch is that the sort of planning model is much more intentional, and you are making very concrete decisions about what it is that you're trying to achieve.
And we're seeing that even more now. I think we were saying this when we spoke, that we're seeing it more now. We're seeing that, post-COVID, that brands are saying, hey, we can't wait for the channel to tell us what the forecast is. We have to make the decision. And this is one of the things we love about the output of the last 3 months, is that brands are actually saying, hey, no, we're taking control and we're making our own decisions, and we're planning rather than waiting for forecasts. And they're saying, okay, in the absence of having a forecast that we can, trust, we are going to we're going to plan, and we're going to paint a picture of what success looks like. This puts the brand in control. It gives them much more power.
And so, I'm curious, and I know you sort of like touched on this a bit, but what is, from a very sort of practical point of view, like, how do you think about that sort of like drop execution? Like, how do you define or ensure sort of success within the context of using this model?
Again, look, global logistics is very mature and it's very competitive now. So again, one of the things what we do is we break down the first mile and the last mile, and we're the first mile we'll buy it bulk from an airline. We'll buy it from some of the freight companies. The last mile will go to local partners who will do that last mile, and we'll coordinate it globally. And sometimes we'll do a global deal with some of the bigger companies, the bigger well-known freight or express service companies. We'll manage that entire journey. And again, working with the brands, depending on the value of the product, depending on the experience that they want to create, we will then decide, okay, so it's going to be like next day air from around the world, or 48-hour air. That's expensive, but depending on the value of the product, it may make more sense. 48 hours air might cost X dollars, but if you're going to sit it, in a warehouse in warehouses all around the world, you're going to have working capital tied up. That's massive risk. And again, as a company, we don't take risk, we manage risk. And this is a big part of de-risking business DTC.
Yeah, I love that sort of idea of how the sort of working capital is much more sort of like agile or available to brands in sort of this context, so that they can be much more intelligent about how they're sort of like operating their business. And then I guess from a sort of practical point of view as well, like thinking about you're able to work to the level of like helping a brand sort of determine what that package is going to look like, what that sort of unboxing experience is going to be, and then are you also able to in that sort of interim between sort of a package is shipped and it gets to the consumer, are you able to help brands with that experience as well, like that sort of like lead, like that communication in between?
Yeah, I mean, look, for us, a major distinction for us when we work with companies, we look for companies that are passionate about design, they're passionate about their brand, and they're passionate about the consumer experience. That's where we add value. Anybody else, we just add cost. We're not interested in that space. We want to work with brands that really care about those three things: design, brand, consumer experience. That's where we really differentiate. And that starts with ensuring that the product is well designed, ensuring you're using great materials, the right materials, sustainable, ensuring minimal packaging. You're going to have that out-of-box experience is going to be great, but you're not going to use like extra, material that's not necessary. And then it's when the consumer gets it. The other thing is we'll do, like we have in our facility, we have drop test capabilities. So when the product, we'll test the product, over and over and over again, so that if it falls along the journey, that it's not going to fall apart and that it's going to stay intact. And so we'll do all that, because that's all part of that out-of-box experience. When the consumer gets it and they take it out of the box, it has to be a great experience. And then it's likewise, it has to work. So, we insert questionnaires for consumers that they can actually, when they take the product out of the box, they can scan, they take a photograph of a QR code that will take them to an app, or take them to a website where they can answer questions about the experience. And if they have any questions about the product, they can ask those questions there. And through AI, we can actually answer quite a few of those.
And I'm curious, I mean, we talked about this a bit at the beginning, but obviously there's, so much of what the drop model is that we're kind of familiar with exists within the context of like a fashion, particularly sort of streetwear perspective. And you obviously see that being much more applicable to all product categories. What does it, what's the mindset shift or for other brands to really sort of like make that switch, or what is the challenge? Like, what's the challenge? Why do we not see this more widely?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's usually down to historic numbers and historic targets that they have got to meet, and they don't, they need channel marketing, they need channel dollars to get the product out there, and they're in that rat race to get product out. I actually think now is probably a really interesting time, and some of the best conversations we're having now, because it's a chance for a lot of brands to restart, because they haven't been very active, and some of them have, their e-commerce has really boomed in the last 3.5 months, so they're very open for these conversations today, and they're saying, wow, we just put a toe in the water and it's not that bad, and we can actually do this. And I think that now is a really interesting time for brands that really want to innovate and to get control of their brands, and to make sure that their marketing dollars are being spent direct to the consumers that buy their products, and give them a chance to build a relationship and the bond with those consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so much of what we're seeing sort of across the board in all the conversations that we're having, and especially over the last 3 days, is that this sort of moment that we're in now is a sort of opportunity to kind of reinvent the way that business is done. And, there's still risk associated with it, but, if not now, then when, sort of thing. So,
yeah, I think I heard the joke the other day is, who is the greatest innovator in your company? Is it the CEO, the CMO, or COVID-19? COVID-19 is winning most of that.
So I guess as we sort of sort of close out the conversation, and you just sort of hinted on this a little bit, but as we sort of continue to emerge from the sort of current situation, what do you sort of see in terms of what's going to shift in terms of how brands and businesses sort of operate?
So I think the relationship, the D2C, I think, is definitely, everyone knows it's increasing. You look at the beauty industry and what it has done there. And I think it's going to continue to grow, and it's going to continue to grow across different sectors. And then, sure enough, what happens in every sector is if one brand shows a sign of success, everybody will copy them. So all it takes is one breakthrough in a sector, and they're going to be copied, which is great. I think so. You're going to find a lot more relationship building between the consumer and the brand, and then consumers will make or brands will make commitments that they will deliver a great experience, and that's where they really have to engage, and they have to focus on, okay, what does the consumer want? And you can manage it. If you go back 5 years ago, I would have been sitting here telling you, hey, I can make 1 million units a day. Today, I tell you, I can manage orders of 1 a day. So that's a big change. But yet it's far more sustainable. You can still do very large volumes, massive volumes, but you need to be able to manage down to individual consumer, individual order. And you want to be able to connect that unique product to that unique consumer anywhere in the world. And I think that you're going to see, in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of investment going into logistics. And I think you're going to see that's going to continue. Smart logistics are really important. And we see some of the stuff that we're testing out at the moment with some of our micro DCs, where we're actually shipping product. We still consider it to be an 8,000 mile last mile, where we ship the product from origin directly to the consumer. And we'll do it in the shortest time possible. We may have a break in the very last mile, but that break is strategic because it is to allow us to use companies like Uber, Postmates, Axelhire, any of these companies that can manage the last mile. But they will actually do the last mile, but they'll pick it up at our micro DC, and they'll do it at a scheduled time over a period of 24 hours. It just gives us greater control over that last mile delivery. We'll know the driver, we'll know the consumer, we'll know that connection point when it happens. And we can do all that, inside of 48 hours from when it leaves the production line where it's produced to when it's actually delivered to the consumer. And we also show, there's a QR code on the box, on every box that shows, when you scan it, it shows you through that entire journey. It's completely transparent. And you can go all the way direct from the consumer or from the production line all the way through, and we're completely transparent.
That's amazing. It really is even as you describe the sort of the Uber kind of component within there, there is that sort of ability to really create this very one-to-one relationship where it's even just there's a known individual who's handing off that product, so to speak, to the consumer.
Absolutely. And you look at it, you've got it's existing assets that are in the marketplace that are underutilized, and all you're doing is utilizing that existing those assets.
That's incredible. Well, Liam, thanks so much for taking the time today. As a reminder, everyone, we do have a report that we just published with PCH called The Art of the Drop. I think it's in the comments of this of our live stream today. And if you have any difficulties accessing it, please get in touch and we'll make sure that we get that in your hands. Liam, good luck with everything. Thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Scott.